The opinions and statements made by the guests of the Success in Practice podcast are their own, and I do not endorse or accept responsibility for their positions. Any information given by myself or the guests is educational in intention and not to be taken as medical advice. If you choose to act on the content involved in the podcast, you do so at your own risk. Welcome everyone to the Success in Practice podcast. Thank you for joining me again. I'm joined today by John Smartt. John is an osteopath practicing out of two clinics in Sydney, one located in Sydney City and the other one out at Mortdale in Sydney's southern suburbs. He's been a practicing osteopath since 2002. And graduated as part of the first cohort to finish the University of Western Sydney Osteopathy program. And that's where I got to meet John for the first time. John has a background in business analysis and analytics and actually started his osteopathic education at a later age, at the age of 39, and is in a unique position to have graduated at a later age too. He's currently also offering services to osteopaths in terms of business coaching. So we'll ask him some questions regarding that. And he has also compiled a very extensive evidence database for osteopaths in the realm of manual medicine. So having a look at manual medicine and some of the evidence that's around for that. And so I want to really speak to John today about those subjects, especially about the evidence. And I want to also get his thoughts on some business, analysis and coaching and how we can help people there. John, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Sammy, and thank you also for all that you do for new graduates. It takes a lot of your time, and it's a valuable thing.
It does, mate. But as you know too, you've probably met some graduates. It's very rewarding, when you can get to give back. So I get as much out of it as what I put in.
Oh, that's great.
John, I want to first start by just asking you some very basic things around your day-to-day osteopathic life, your week-to-week. Tell us about a week in the life of John regarding osteopathy. You're practicing at two current clinics at the moment, one in the city in Sydney and one in Mortdale. We're actually neighbours. My clinic is in Peakhurst and you're down the road in Mortdale. So tell us about your week of practice. What's that look like?
So I work fairly long days. I work in the city from 8:30 to about 6:30, or I'm actually cutting down to about 5:30. That's treating time on Thursdays and Fridays, and then a bit longer when I'm local at Mortdale from 8 to about 6 o'clock or later. Sort of real variety of things. My particular niche is really complicated patients with a whole overlay of things going on, often chronic fatigue, often some emotional trauma bound up in all of that. Doing a lot these days with endometriosis, because it's pretty well impossible to be in that situation if you're a woman and not have some endometriosis. And there's various reasons why that is. So I'm getting a bit of a reputation and seeing people from all over for that. But yeah, I see otherwise the variety of people we see in practice, from little kids to people in their 90s and everything in between.
Great, mate. I want to ask you a question, maybe, and take you back in time a little bit. You began your osteopathic education at the age of 39 over at UWS. That was actually you were part of the first group of people to go through that course.
Yeah.
And that must have been kind of exciting and a little bit scary at that time. You've got a background in business coaching and analytics and systems and databases. What made you make the shift from that to osteopathy?
So the actual thing I was involved with was called organisation development, which was extremely rewarding and extremely frustrating. So trying to change the culture of a whole organisation, sort of from the middle of the organisation, and was kind of at the top of my career in doing that. But it was work where it was really hard to know whether you were having an effect, because you're working sort of 6 months out, and you'd kind of work out if you had an effect 6 months out, and a whole lot of senior people could do things to mess it up long before you got to that point. And I got to the point where that was driving me crazy. And when I discovered osteopathy, it was kind of, hey, this is medicine the way I've always thought about problems. It's the medicine the way I consult, which is someone brings you a problem, but that's just the presenting problem. Then you look deeper at what are the underlying causes, what's driving this, how does this connect to other things, what's the most efficient way to intervene. And I just fell in love. I went, wow, I can consult to bodies with my hands and talking to people the same way I've always known to think, but see results straight away. What an exciting thing to do! So that was a big part of the decision to make the shift.
Right. So you made the shift. You started the program. You were the first year through. What were some of the good things about that program, and what were some of the things that frustrated you?
So what was great about the program, and Peter Green, who set it up, deserves a lot of credit for this. What was really great was that uh, he understood that in a university course you should teach people to think and expose people to a breadth of ideas. So we got to see a really wide gamut of what can be involved in osteopathy, and because it was the first year round, a lot of osteopaths um, were very keen to volunteer their time. So we had all sorts of different perspectives of different people coming in and saying, "This is my idea of osteopathy." Gave us an idea of the breadth and some of the exciting things people were doing, and also helped us to understand the principles running through that made all those different approaches consistent. What was frustrating was uh, there were certainly some teething coordination problems, some areas missed, some overlapping of learning things too many times, and the university didn't seem to want to spend anything like as much on the course as we were paying because it was a full fee paying
Hmm.
masters. So there were certainly frustrations along the way as you'd expect in a new course, but overall I'd call it a very positive experience, and I think people who graduated about the same time as I um, did come out with this big sense of even if they didn't particularly want to publish or practice broadly, they could see that broad practice was that osteopathy is a broad thing and that a lot of different things can work.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess getting your perspective on that is great too, because like myself, I was a kind of an 18-year-old kid when I first started, so I was just happy to be there. You know,
Yeah,
39-year-old man, and with
yeah.
a different mindset. And I guess getting your perspective on that is good, because it gives us an idea of the actual quality, of the program. And you're right, everybody that's graduated, in those first probably 5 to 7 years of that program has really benefited from having a broad understanding of osteopathy, and a great understanding of the fundamentals and the foundations and the principles that have
Hmm.
kind of sustained us. Um, and so, okay, so you graduated that program, and then you did something that's a little bit different than what most people would do. You went and just practiced on your own straight away, rather than maybe doing a couple of years with somebody who's had lots of experience. Tell us your reasoning for that and why you did that.
Yeah, so there were a couple of reasons. One is to keep the money up. I kept consulting to my clients, most of whom were in the city at the same time. So I wanted to be able to duck out and see a consulting client and then come back and do some osteopathy. So being in the city was important. There were other osteopaths working in the city, um, but I was pretty much an old man by then, but mid 40s. I'm a much older man now,
Mate,
but
40. You would have been my age.
yeah, that's right.
That's not old. Excuse me,
Uh,
John.
oh God! Look, my apologies. I was very, very young, 45. But I knew at the time that, uh, yeah, and I'd learned enough through university and seeing different approaches that I wanted to be able to think things through for myself. And because I was making most of my income at that stage from consulting, I had the luxury of sort of charging rates for charging this amount of time you charge for a short treatment, but giving a long treatment, which in turn gave me the luxury of being able to try a whole lot of different things with patients. And if they were working great, if they weren't working, I'd still have time to do the things I'd been taught, so that the person could leave with a good treatment. I wasn't um, putting their treatment at risk for me to experiment, and that gave me. I hoped it wouldn't, and looking back, it did. Fortunately, it gave me a terrific chance to work out the best ways for me to do things and to treat a whole lot of conditions. So the effect of that mean I've developed a whole lot of different modalities and approaches that I've found work for me and work for my patients.
Right. So, okay. Well, I guess that's a unique situation to be in. Is that
Very
something?
fortunate.
Yeah. Is that something you would advise? I mean, new graduates now to do? Like, is that something, especially with maybe the changing landscape of education and what they're exposed to?
Yeah.
I guess your particular education, especially being part of that group where you had a breadth of exposure to different osteopaths and different ideas, you were probably a little bit more prepared to go out on your own. Would you advise new graduates now to do the same thing, or is that something that you would advise against?
Um, I think it's a very individual thing. It depends on your level of confidence and your economic circumstances. Uh, if you have the luxury of doing it, um, and and the confidence to do it, it was great for me. I'm not sure I would advise it to others. I think everyone has to make their own call on that, and a lot of people will do better with someone to guide them. But certainly, I think what I'd say rather is um, rather than necessarily tell you how to do it. I've been able to learn things that aren't normally taught, which are incredibly valuable, like uh, how to treat a nerve, how to find out where the obstruction is in a nerve and treat a nerve, how to treat the lymphatic system in a whole range of different ways, how to treat connective tissues. Now everyone treats these things, but whether you actually know you're treating them or whether you just freeing up a spine and hoping that it also has an effect on nerves and blood vessels, lymphatics, and so on it's a whole different thing when you get to be able to know what you're doing with actually finding a dysfunction in a nerve or in a blood vessel and treating that thing. And that's the sort of thing I've been able to learn by having the luxury of being able to experiment. Uh, but if anyone wants to learn that, they can just come and observe me. Because I
Well, I
mean,
guess I guess what I'm
if
saying,
people, so I guess what I'm saying is if people didn't have to go through that much time of figuring it out, if
yeah,
there was quicker ways for them to learn it, that would be great.
yeah. Well, there are. I mean, there's plenty of experienced people out there that
Yeah.
could help them. But so what you're saying, if you have the luxury of finances, if you have the luxury of time, it may be something for you. But if you're a 20-something-year-old person and you don't have that luxury and you haven't had the breadth of exposure, maybe go out and get it, and then you can go out on your own after that. Would that be good advice?
Yeah, I think it's something individuals have to work out. It's a very individual thing how you want to do it.
John, I remember a little while ago, mate, attending an osteopathy conference, and you presented on the effects of hamstring on Sherman's kyphosis.
Yeah,
I remember that, and so I want to ask you a little bit about that. You did a presentation and you showed some, I guess, native people of different cultures and how
yeah,
they operated, and then you looked at how they would kind of not really have the Sherman's problem because they did a lot of bending over and picking stuff up. Um, that's I remember that distinctly from the presentation. Can you elaborate on that for us a little bit and what some of your findings were when you looked at that particular presentations of Sherman's kyphosis and the role of the hamstrings? Hello, everyone. I'd like to take a quick moment to thank everyone for watching and listening to the podcast. If you have received value from this episode, the kindest thing you can do for me is to like, share, follow, and subscribe to the channel on whichever platform that you are listening on. If any of the conversations have resonated with you and you feel that I can help elevate your practice, you can find me at successinpractice.net. That is, the Success in Practice program can be found at successinpractice.net. The Success in Practice program is the signature program that takes a practitioner who may be struggling with retaining patients. They may not be certain about building effective treatment strategies, and they may feel somewhat anxious and doubtful about what they are going to do with a patient. And they are not really accelerating in the real world of private practice. It takes this practitioner and it turns their careers right around to the point where the patients have an effective diagnosis and a real treatment plan that they can take home. Patients are happy to book in multiple sessions with you, and they are confident about your abilities. And more importantly, you now have direction and are confident about your own abilities. The program streamlines how you operate as a practitioner. Guys, you should have been taught this at university, but you weren't. You may have been practicing for the last few years thinking there has to be a better way. There has to be a more effective way of engaging with patients and getting them results. Well, there is. And this is what the program delivers. Go to successinpractice.net and check out the options available to you. See where I can help you easily grow your patient list and finally earn the rewarding income that you deserve. For all the information on how you can reach me personally, check out the show notes. Also in the show notes, you'll find a link to the chat transcripts from these podcasts. These are valuable and a wealth of information. I really hope that you're enjoying the podcast. Guys, leave a comment if there's any questions on this episode. And please, don't forget to like, share, follow, and subscribe to the channel. Now, back to the show.
Sure, and I understand a bit more about it now. So one of the things that I find with Scheuermann's kyphosis, and I've got Scheuermann's, and my son has Scheuermann's, so it's a particular interest for me. According to a German patient of mine who had it, Scheuermann's is the
Right.
Scheuermann's apparently is the if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
We'll stick to Sherman's, I think.
Yeah, but it's very often the hamstrings aren't well activated enough, because even when we lift, we teach people to lift by squatting. So we use the quads. We use the quads to get up and down stairs. But we don't, when we bend over, because we squat rather than bend over, we don't tend to activate our hamstrings. And so I find just activating the hamstrings is good for any kyphosis, whether it's Scheuermann's or just the kyphosis of old age. So it's not a hamstring stretch, it's when you activate them. I've since learned, quite recently, that it has to do, it's a neurological thing. It has to do with activating the spinothalamic tracts. I think spinovestibular tracts. Don't quote me on that. Someone look that up and let me know. But it activates. So it's not so much strengthening the hamstrings; it's just activating that part of the brain. But I've learned a bit more about kyphosis too. Another thing that happens is very often people with Scheuermann's kyphosis, and I'm one, have a retained what's called a Landau reflex. Now, a Landau reflex, if any of you work with babies or have babies, if you bring your babies home from hospital and you rest them on your stomach, they'll just flop over, and at 3 months' time they'll go into Superman pose where they arch their back and lift their arms and lift their legs. That's the Landau reflex. People with an active Landau reflex, we don't lose those primitive reflexes, we retain them, but we normally lay other nerve pathways over on top of them. People who don't do that, who have a retained Landau reflex, can't lie down and lift their head without activating the hamstrings. That means when they're standing up and they tilt their head back, they can't do that without activating the hamstrings and their glutes, which would normally pull you over backwards. In order to compensate, make sure we don't fall over backwards as soon as we tilt our head back, people with an active Landau reflex end up unconsciously putting their head forward to maintain their balance. And so that's one of the causes of Scheuermann's kyphosis, particularly people when they're growing, just to maintain their balance, just having the head forward, and the spine forms that gets those wedge-shaped vertebrae that go with Scheuermann's. So treating the Landau reflex, which you can do with a thing called rhythmic movement training. There's some particular exercises can be done to develop those pathways to address that retained Landau reflex. It does a lot for Scheuermann's kyphosis. So,
and you've been applying that in your clinic with good results.
Yeah, good results. Good results with me. Good results with patients. I was talking to a patient the other day, and she said, "Well, but you don't have this." I said, "You should have seen it, even at university, when it was really obvious how natural it was for me to hold my head forward. But it's not perfect, but it's a lot better now." So yeah, I do get good results with kyphosis with that.
Great. Okay. So, moving forward, you kind of now you're practicing across 2 clinics. You're doing about 40 hours of table time, and you're getting. You said to me earlier that you're becoming somewhat known for having a look at endometriosis
Yeah,
and treating that. How did that come about? Like, did you kind of fall into that? Were people just seeing you and you got good results and then that
yeah.
rolled on, or was it something that you wanted to do?
No, complete accident. I saw a patient, and something I have always wanted to do, and it partly fits in with my history, is treating very, very sick people with a vast range of conditions, including chronic fatigue. And I was treating one of those people, and she sent me a photo one morning. She was due to come in. She was quite a slender woman, and she looked. And I treated her the week before, and she sent me a photo and said, "What happened to me?" And she looked about 6 months pregnant. Her stomach had just blown out terribly. I had no idea what could have happened. I assumed she must have burst an ovarian cyst and be having an inflammatory reaction to that. And I did a lot of work on the lymphatic system, so I got her in for her treatment, did some work on that, treating the lymphatic system, uh, and the swelling went down maybe sort of 2/3 in the one treatment. She was a lot more comfortable. And when she had her ultrasound, we were looking for damage to an ovary or a burst cyst. They said her ovaries imaged normally, but it appeared she had endometriosis. Now, endometriosis doesn't normally show up on ultrasound. It does if there's cysts, particularly cysts on the ovaries. So they found those, and so, well, next time she was in, I just treated her the same way, and I treated that for quite a few years, and just because it became pretty clear what endometriosis felt like, and once you can palpate it, and I just assumed the lymphatic system was absorbing it. Um, but then when I uh, uh, was running a course with some other osteopaths on endometriosis, I did a vast amount of research into the literature to understand what was going on. And it was a fascinating story in terms of osteopathic thinking and our paradigms compared to mainstream paradigms. It's quite an illustration of the different ways to think, because the one particular study that looked at the lymphatic system and endometriosis said that women with endometriosis have some major problems. They're very different people because um, their endometrial material is stickier than other people's, and it has things in it called fibrinolytic factors, which break down connective tissues and make it reabsorbed. And they've got other whole range of chemicals which make them grow more blood vessels and lymphatic vessels and nerves. And so they were saying, well, they've got all this stuff that makes it get sticky and then grows more blood vessels. So their endometriosis gets a, um, a blood supply of its own and gets into the lymphatic system. Shock horror, maybe we should remove the lymphatic system to, to fix this problem, because now it's getting into the lymphatic system and go everywhere. And as an osteopath, I looked at this. Admittedly, I looked at this knowing that treating the lymphatic system worked. I went and read the papers carefully and went, no, it's not. The research isn't actually saying that their endometrial material is different when it's in the uterus. It's when it gets out of the uterus. It gets sticky, it gets reabsorbed, it grows more things. That's not a problem. That's sophisticated. That's a sophisticated way of dealing with this. So all we need to do, and it's very simple and it's easy to support people in doing it, easy to teach them to do it. All we need to do for this horrible condition is support what the lymphatic system is doing anyway to get rid of it. I mean, that's not quite all, because it gets more sophisticated when you look at the neurology of the lymphatic system and about the what's happening with uterine peristalsis and hormones and so on, keeping it recovering. But it's it's disturbingly easy to treat, given how much what women go through in terms of the pain. When women talk about being bent up, doubled on the floor, unable to get up, just horrible stuff. And I see people who've had 4 surgeries and more, and it still keeps coming back.
So
And
what
it's
you're saying, the main connection point is the lymphatic system, though.
is the
I mean,
lymphatic system. Yeah, the
yeah.
lymphatic system. I believe the body's got a really good way of dealing with it, and it's only when the lymphatic system gets overloaded that it becomes a problem.
So
And
your advice is to support the lymphatic system. That's a complicated thing. What you're saying, supporting the lymphatic system, is a bit more complicated. But given that an osteopath is good at doing that, or can get good at doing that, they can really help patients with endometriosis.
yeah, I treat quite a few patients to treat their own endometriosis. I had one experience of teaching a builder on online how to treat his partner who had it, and she said, "That's great. That feels just like when you do it." The skills to do it actually aren't difficult. So
Yeah.
I just want everyone to learn how to learn that it's an incredibly treatable condition.
Great. Well, you mentioned that you ran a course a little while ago on doing that. Is that something that you would consider doing in the future, or are you thinking about doing things like that, or is that something that's behind you?
Yeah, no, I completely would if there's the interest. It was hard to get people there, and I think that's partly because people think of endometriosis being applying to only a few people. Now that I can palpate endometriosis, I think that um, most period pain, if not, well, certainly the vast majority of period pain is actually endometriosis, and that there's a lot of endometriosis causing things like back pain and hormonal disruptions and urinary tract infections and all sorts of other things, which doesn't even cause pain. So I think it's a huge issue. So I definitely like to offer more courses if there's an interest in it. Yeah.
All right. Well, speaking of courses, one of the things that you do is you help osteopaths look at their own businesses and coach them through maybe some business analytics and look at how they could, I guess, give an osteopathic treatment to their own businesses.
Yeah.
That's something that you've just kind of restarted at the moment. I know you did it a while ago and then you kind of stopped with it, but now you've restarted it. Tell us a little bit about that and what you actually do in that field.
Yeah, so there's actually a couple of things. There's a so for osteopaths who don't have their own businesses, there's a lot of osteopaths who are a bit lost in their careers. They fell into it. It's not quite what they wanted. They didn't quite know what they wanted when they started, and there's some things that work for them and some things that don't. I've got a process that I actually developed in 1993. So I've done hundreds of people now. Of getting people to tell me stories, and we look for the patterns in the stories that they tell me, and find out what really motivates them, so they can think about what parts of osteopathy work for them, what else they need in their life, what's not working for them at all. Just helping them so I guess it's more osteopathy for osteopathic
Right.
careers more than osteopaths. But in terms of the business, yeah, I've got a whole. I've been coaching business people, big and small, for a long time, and I've got a whole program including a list of over 100 questions for a sort of self-review, and then a way of thinking about the direction of the business, and questions if you don't know what's going on to set a strategic direction and ask those sort of questions. Questions to think about the clientele, the niche, and to look at the transactions that people are running, and work out what that means in terms of the rate of return people they're seeing, and we'll call the marketing funnel, sort of how many people they're seeing, how many people they think they're probably contacting in order to get return them, and so on, so they can work out where to spend the money in
Right.
terms of the money, in terms of their business, look at their operations, and think about really what they want out of the business and how they're going to get there, and what they want for them personally. Look at staff issues, which is really my area, and then cash flow and tweaking the cash flow. So making decisions about if I raise my prices by so much but lose so much business through it, what effect is that going to have? And so that's a whole kind
Have
of
you
thing to look at what they're interested in.
have you worked with many osteopaths in that field?
No, no, I haven't had any takers on the recent lot at all.
But
I
previously,
do,
have you worked
yeah.
with osteopaths previously, or
Three or four, yeah, on
right?
different things, and I've got to say, a couple like with that detail, but mostly it was actually, and I'm happy to work at this level as well. Mostly what I was dealing with was people feeling pretty burnt out for what turned out to be much more personal health issues
Right.
than anything else. What we do is a demanding job, and sometimes
Yeah.
people just need someone to talk to and to clarify that no, actually it's not your career, it's your health that's the issue here.
Yeah. Right. Right. Interesting. Okay. Well, I guess given that we've worked with many business owners, I guess many business people, like, because you've seen a lot of people in that field, but a lot of them haven't been osteopaths, and you said you've worked with maybe 3 or 4 in the past. And you found that the main reasons for their particular issues have been more health related. let's go back to the business side of things. When you have worked with business people, are there any? What are say the three most common things that say people need to look out for when they are running their own business? Where could they get caught? Like, say you've been running a business for 10, 15 years or 10 or 12 years, and you just you find your business in a little bit of a rut. When you go to look at the numbers, what do you find are the three most common things that people are either overlooking or they're not really paying attention to?
Great question. The most commonly overlooked one is offsite backup for your computer system, I think, and it's less of an issue if you're using an online booking system. But even so, there's so many people who either don't back up their systems or have their booking online. Sorry, have their booking on site. So if they get a break in or if they get a fire, that's it. They've lost everything. Like I say, much less of an issue if you're using an online booking system and an online accounting system. In terms of osteopathic practices, I see the huge problem whether you're an associate or whether you're a business owner. We have this lack of clarity around what it means to be an associate. So if people were associate, I was commenting on this the other day, supposing you're an employee, then it's pretty clear, for example, that you turn up when you're expected to turn up. You do what you're told to do. The employer pays you leave. The employer pays for your training. If you're doing what I do, which is renting a space, then it's pretty clear that you turn up whenever you want to turn up and you pay for your own training. You don't ask anyone's permission to do anything as long as you keep paying your rent. In the middle, we have this area where a lot of these issues aren't discussed in the first place. So we find a lot of business owners get frustrated because their associates keep wanting to take more time off than the business owner wants to let them have. They want to turn up at their hours and not turn up. Business owners get frustrated that associates don't want to contribute to their own developing their own businesses, or they don't want to pay for their own training. And then on the other side, the associates often get frustrated. They feel like the business owners are making ridiculous demands on them, taking all this money, not doing enough to build their businesses, et cetera, et cetera. And it's really, it's a mismatched expectations and things which aren't sat down, discussed, made clear. And to me, the analogy of this sort of lack of clarity in a business relationship, it's a lot like going out onto a sporting field without deciding who's playing in what position and what that means. You don't win games, you just end up fighting among yourselves. I thought you were going to be over there, well, I thought you were going to be over there. And so there's a whole lot of what I see as unnecessary conflict and angst and turnover of associates, which hurts everyone, hurts the business owner, hurts the associate, and absolutely hurts the patient. They just get to know someone and they move on. Because of these just mismatched expectations about what it means to be an associate. And there's no right answer. The only right answer is that it ought to be really clear up front about what the expectations are, and both parties should have agreed to that this is what they're committing to. So that's number two. What's number three? I think number three is for any business owner. You take on a business because you think it's going to give you a lifestyle, and it doesn't give you the lifestyle. It takes over your life because you're not sort of strong enough about what you want the business to be and what you don't want it to be. And along with that, running a business is doing it well is time consuming. It's particularly time consuming when you're getting people established, when you're getting systems established. If you can keep that in place and keep the people in place, it gets pretty easy. But the changes is a lot of work, and so you've got to decide whether you'd rather be spending your time running a business or being a practitioner. Because if you do both, you'll work ridiculously hard. I know a lot about business, and so I've made the decision to rent space from other people and not run a business. That's just my personal choice, because I'd rather put the time into being a treater than to being a business owner.
Yeah, right. That's great insight. Thank you for that. Okay, so look, I want to move along now to another topic that's of interest to me, and this is a big reason why I wanted to talk to you today. A little while ago, I saw a little Facebook post about evidence in osteopathy. I remember that particular post, and you probably remember it too. And you had come back with a comment and said, well, actually, no, there is a whole bunch of evidence to support, osteopathy and manual medicine, and this is what I've done. If anybody wants a copy of this, just please contact me. And I was like, what's John done here? And what what you've done is you actually compiled a database of evidence across the board for manual medicine. And I guess that's something that osteopaths can tap into. So can you discuss that with me a little bit? So tell us exactly what you've done, John. Tell us about the process and what you have. I think you've got this little pot of gold with you, mate, and I want to know more about it. So can you tell us a bit more about what you've done in that realm in terms of evidence for osteopathy and manual medicine as a whole?
Sure. So it started out when people were making comments on Facebook to the extent that there's no evidence for osteopathy, or in particular, was no evidence for cranial osteopathy. And I kind of went, oh, well, I don't know much about the evidence, but I'm pretty sure I've seen something for cranial. Let me look that up. And so I started doing that, going through PubMed, and built a little database just so that I could keep track of what I was finding. And Pot of Gold is right. It just got very exciting. I just kept going, oh, really? Someone's done that's a really well designed, controlled clinical trial, and that's compelling news. And they've looked at that, and they looked at that, and I can't believe no one knows this stuff. So I've just I put a lot of time into it a few years ago. I have to admit, I haven't. I'm sure the field's moved on since then. It's probably 4 years since I've invested any serious time into it, but I've got hundreds of studies. Something like, last time I counted, 76 conditions that have good research for them, um, and nobody knows about it. Academics don't know about it, and people keep saying things like there's no evidence for osteopathy, which drives me crazy. I think I found something like it was over 40 systematic reviews of different things that found positive results for using manual therapy for different conditions.
So that's level one evidence.
Yeah. It's just there's actually a vast amount. And to put it into perspective, something we didn't talk about earlier, the assumption is always that whatever happens in a GP's clinic is going to be really evidence based, because you're dealing with pharmaceuticals, and they have to have done research. In fact, the position isn't anything like that simple, for a number of reasons. And the first is polypharmacy. So older people in particular getting prescribed 10, well, I think more than 5 things is called polypharmacy, but very often for them to be on 10 or more things. And that's never been researched, can't be researched. You can't really do a research on it, because you can't have a cohort of people on no medication and another cohort on people on the same 10 things and keep them on it for enough time to see anything significant happen out of it. But what we do know, with studies that look at whole populations of people and compare them with similar health conditions, we do know that polypharmacy is bad. We do know that it makes things worse, but yet that's a vast amount of the prescriptions that's given. Then there's doctors not applying evidence, for instance, giving antibiotics for kids' middle ear infections for otitis media. Evidence says that doesn't work.
John, sorry,
So
before you continue with the explanation, just for our listeners, can you explain what polypharmacy means?
sorry, yes. Polypharmacy means people getting a lot of drugs at once. It's from
Right.
five or more drugs.
Okay.
And sorry, there's a bit of an echo coming in on my line. Is that coming in on yours, or is that all okay?
We can see what we can do here with the. Let me just make a note of this time so I can get this out with editing. Let me go to the sound here. I'll put some echo cancellation on your end. Is that better?
Yeah, that's better. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, so another issue there is what's called offline prescribing, where something's approved for one thing and doctors prescribe it for another. And around the world, different studies estimate that to be about 18% of all prescriptions. You put that together, and my best estimate is maybe a quarter of what happens in a GP surgery is evidence-based. And on the basis of what's available for osteopaths, I actually think what we do, there's a lot more good published evidence for what we do, probably, than for what happens in a GP's clinic. That's a story that we ought to be getting out there. We ought to understand ourselves, and we absolutely ought to be pushing back on people who tell us that there's no evidence for what we do.
Okay,
That's not
so
a supportable position.
so you've put this database together, and I remember at the time you put it up on your website, and you put a call out there to people that if anyone wants to access this, just to contact you, and you would share that. You were very gracious with that, and you would share that database with people, at least for what they needed it for. How was the take up on that? Did people contact you and say, "Hey, John,
In individuals do around particular issues. Some people have asked my whole database. It's actually a bit hard if they don't have the software I run, but I'm happy to sort of give people. It quite often happens. Maybe once a month, someone contacts me and says, "What have you got in terms of evidence for this?" So I can just run them off a report saying this is the evidence for this. If they've got to do a presentation, I want to know about it,
yeah,
or whatever. Yeah.
okay," and then this. I mean, if people had known about this, or when they do know about it, I'm assuming it'll be like, "Oh, hold on a sec, wait a minute, we've got something really good here." And I guess you felt the same way. This would have been very exciting for you. You took that to, I guess, the association or Osteopathy Australia, and what was the response there? Was that something that they said? Because I think the Orion, they've got the Orion system
Orion project, yeah.
Orion system that they run, and I guess if they could take what you've got and integrate it with what they have, then we could at least have a position on certain things where we could say, "Hey, here's the evidence. This is what osteopaths can do." And I guess so. You took that to them, and what was the response? What happened there?
I think it's fair to say that they were willing to accept that I had a database. They didn't show any appetite for doing anything with it themselves, or for particularly wanting to follow up on that. In terms of why that is, that would be a question for them.
Yeah, that would be a great question for them, and if we can get someone there from the association on the podcast, that'll be a great question to ask. And okay, so that's a bit of a juxtaposition for me, because we're constantly seeing position statements and talk about being careful not to treat without evidence. And I guess if we had access to the information that you have, John, we could at least have the evidence there for us to do the kinds of treatments that we need to do for our patients. It's all about patient care at the end of the day. And so that seems a bit unusual. And I guess you're right, that's a question for them to answer. But it's a little bit disappointing. I'm a member of Osteopathy Australia, and I guess for me as a member, that's a little bit disappointing that it at least wasn't given the attention that it deserves. Okay, so that database at the moment is not. Is that still currently on your website? If people need to contact you, is that something that you can share with people, or how does that work now?
So what I did have on my website was a couple of tables, one by a patient category, one by condition, with just the numbers of positive, sort of negative, and then categorized by systematic review, controlled clinical trial, cohort study, case study, etc. With the numbers of studies, and then people could click on the links and find the studies and look at them themselves. I made no comment or value judgment about them. Unfortunately, APRA asked me to take it down. They said it was deceptive conduct, because their view was they didn't actually say that the studies weren't of good quality, just that studies have different quality, different levels of quality, and so therefore it could be deceiving to people to think there were all these studies positive to osteopathy if they weren't in a position to judge the studies for themselves. So they made me take them down. So that's no longer on my website. But
Wow. Okay.
me about them.
So from what I understand, APRA made you take that database down because they said that the breadth of evidence cannot be ascertained by regular people in terms of the quality of evidence.
Correct.
But yet they always ask us to provide evidence for any claims that we make on our websites.
Yeah.
And so, that seems a bit of an issue in terms of understanding that. I mean, you're not making any claims about the value of the evidence. You're just saying, here's the evidence.
No,
This is what it is.
no, not at all. And my interpretation, they may have a different interpretation, but my interpretation is that a lot of that comes from the view that osteopathy is about, in inverted commas, musculoskeletal medicine, and so a lot of what I had was not musculoskeletal, and
Right.
so I think their underlying assumption was probably that the evidence wasn't good if it referred to something non-musculoskeletal. Now I don't know what musculoskeletal even means. It's like, because when muscles have nerves and blood vessels, I don't know how
Right.
you even make those distinctions. But I think that's the thinking behind that.
Okay, I will move on to that question in a minute. But what I want to ask you then is with regards to the actual evidence that you compiled together, was the majority of it? I mean, in terms of musculoskeletal, you're right. But when we look at treating certain conditions that would be, say, to do with human movement kinematics and the musculoskeletal system, I guess, because you did say that you organise those into conditions and patients and so forth. Can you tell us about the actual database in terms of, say, the percentage of it that was say musculoskeletal versus more, say, either visceral or cranial, or I know that's a hard one to kind of, because everything's interconnected. I know as osteopaths we all think that everything's interconnected, but if you had to give that kind of percentage breakdown, can you give us that?
Probably not, but what I can do, if this doesn't get too tedious, is I'll just start reading off. And tell me when to stop, because you've got the
Sure.
idea. But I'll just read off from my list in alphabetical order the condition and the number of studies. Now, some of these are various types of studies. If you want more detail about them, I'll go into them. But anxiety, 20 studies. Asthma, 13 studies. Atelectasis, 1 study. Attention deficit hyperactive ADHD,
Yep.
4 studies. Back pain, 67 studies. Bell's palsy, 1 study. Blocked ear duct, 1 study. Carpal tunnel syndrome, 13 studies. Cellulite, 3 studies. Chest pain, 2 studies. Concussion, 10. Clubfoot, 1 study. Concussion, 10 studies. Should I keep going?
No. So what? Okay. So yeah. I mean,
when I say studies, they're not all positive studies. The vast
right.
majority of them are, and they're
Yeah.
not all proper studies. That was just
Well,
reading off a number.
the interesting one that you mentioned there was lower back pain, right? So, I mean, that's a big one. 67 studies there. And so let's look at, I mean, I guess for our listeners who want to try to cover a more common ground, big things like lower back pain, simple mechanical back pain, spinal pain, shoulder pain, knee pain, they're the things that people are going to be interested in terms of, say, musculoskeletal. So can you give us an idea of, say, the amount of studies on those particular topics?
You said shoulder pain.
Yeah.
Let's have a quick look. Shoulder pain and stiffness, including adhesive capsulitis, 15.
Yep.
This isn't the full number either, because this is out of date. So what were the other issues you had?
Oh, like knee pain, whether it's ligamentous or whether it's patellofemoral, or, just anything to do with...
HIJK.
Because I think it's important that people get the idea in terms of, people think that there's not much evidence to do with manual medicine.
Knee pain, 9 studies.
Yep.
What else did you mention?
Oh, look, we can go through it. I won't really go through it. Hip pain and so forth. So they're the more common conditions that, say, people are seeing. Yeah.
Neck pain, 24 studies.
Wow. Okay, good.
Headaches, another one that people see all the time. Headache and migraine, 31 studies.
Okay, so just given lower back pain, headaches, shoulders, knees, you've got over 100 and, say, 15 studies there.
I mean, some of those are case studies, some of them are negative, but yes, the vast majority are well designed.
Right.
King of the
And
Crimes.
in terms of systematic reviews, you said there was something like 40, 42 systematic reviews on different various conditions to do with manual medicine.
Uh, yeah, I don't have the list. There was actually, if you've got a little while, I can. I've prepared this. Actually, I tell you what I do have on my website under the
Mm.
For Osteopaths thing. I've got a presentation I did for on the osteopathy as science. This was for the New Zealand um, conference some years ago, and yeah, I've got these numbers of things there, and
All right. Well,
people can have a look at that.
people can go and have a look at that. My point being is that this particular database you've put together, it's not to be taken lightly. Like you've done a great job there, John. Like that's
Yeah,
why I
thank you.
said it's a pot of gold, mate. And we've just kind of scratched the surface of it, and we've it's just like even now I'm just thinking about it. It's really amazing to me, and I've been doing this probably a little bit less time than you've been doing it. You know, by a year. I was a year below you, and that amazes me because the constant message that I hear is that you have to be careful because the evidence base is not that great. It's emerging, but it's not that great.
Yeah,
And my message to the listeners out there is that there is an alternative. There is an alternative message. If you want to hear it, contact John. And I guess we shouldn't have to be contact. My point is we shouldn't have to be contacting John. This should be part of our profession. It should be at least integrated and well, at least looked at and not kind of like just pushed to the side. And there may be some things in your particular database, John, that need looking at and saying, well, we can use this or we can't use that. But geez, there's got to be something there that we could use, and I guess that deserves some attention, and the right people should be paying the attention to it. Now, I will go back and ask you and make the point. You're not a member of the association. I call it the association, but what we're talking about is Osteopathy Australia, and I guess I still call it the association because my mindset's a little bit old school. I still prefer to have an association of osteopaths for osteopaths. And so I want to ask you a question about that into my next question. You're no longer a member of Osteopathy Australia. Tell us about maybe the reasons why you're not a member and how you feel an association should be should be working. Hello, everyone. Just a quick break to give you some information on where to best find me. The first place is the private Facebook group called the Successful Practitioner Pathway. I've set up this private group as a place where practitioners can go and get tips and advice on how to best accelerate their practice and improve their clinical practice skills. The second place to find me is at successinpractice.net. That is where the Success in Practice signature program is housed. You can find more information about me and how I can best help you achieve success in your practice. So, the two best places, the private Facebook group, the Successful Practitioner Pathway, and successinpractice.net. I will link to both those places in the show notes. So, for more information, please see the show notes. Now, enjoy and back to the show.
um, sure. I mean, the first thing to say is that I recognise they've got a very difficult job. We had a joke once. What's the name for a collective collective group of osteopaths, and it's a disagreement of osteopaths.
Yeah.
So that they've got a lot of constituents to keep happy. So I appreciate that. It's not an easy job, but I think that there's pressure on any industry association over time to stop becoming an association of its members and to start thinking of itself as a separate entity providing services to them, but being so. Um, and I think the change of name really
Mm.
reflected the fact they stopped thinking of themselves as an as as um, as a way of
As an
simply
association.
of an association of osteopaths and thought of themselves as a separate body supplying services. So once that had happened, then there's two questions. Then there's the question of was I getting anything out of it personally in terms of buying the services they were offering? And the answer was no. The second question is though, do I have an obligation to help pay for services that I'm benefiting from? And I think absolutely that there are things like lobbying on my behalf. I definitely think that I've got a moral obligation to pay for that. So it's a big decision to not do it. The decision not to do it was the conclusion I came to was that their view of what they were lobbying for did not represent my view of what osteopathy is. And so at that point, I decided to stop paying for it, particularly because of this view, which I actually think started from them and then spread to APRA, that it's musculoskeletal medicine or neuromusculoskeletal medicine, which I think is I just don't think that really represents what I do, and that's not lobbying I want to pay for. So
Yep.
it wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right
Okay.
decision for me.
Well, that then segues into my next question. In doing the research that I did for this particular podcast, we got some feedback from you. Is that one of your frustrations is that osteopaths get kind of pigeonholed as musculoskeletal or neuromusculoskeletal, and part of that is also messaging from the Professional Associate or the Osteopathy Australia. That's their messaging. That's clear. It's not, we don't have to debate about that. You can go on their website and their Facebook pages and just see that, their main messaging is around neuromusculoskeletal. People can argue and debate that's something that they've decided more from a directional point of view in terms of moving the profession to an area that is, I guess, stops them from being attacked by other bodies that may have bad intentions. That's been frustrating for you because you see osteopathy as a broader scope, and I guess that comes back to your education because that was offered to you, right? You saw a breadth of different things that osteopathy could help with. So tell us about your frustrations with that, and tell us about where you'd like to see osteopathy go in the future, or what would a perfect world for John look like in terms of how osteopathy is marketed to the public?
What a great question. Um, well, in terms of how it's marketed, the way I describe it to people is in terms of 5 Cs, and I find when I talk to people about this, patients respond automatically, and their frustration with the main medical system comes out. So the way I describe it to people is the first C is we assume that bodies are good at fixing themselves, and we want to know the cause when that's not happening. In terms of the cause, we then think about the connections and their between different parts of the body, and so that includes mechanical connections through joints and fascia and so on, but muscles. But it also includes connections of fluid flows, lymphatic drainage, blood supply, nerve connections, uh, even hormonal connections from one part to another. And in terms of dealing with that, we think about the constrictions and constraints, and that I think is very much consistent with. He didn't use the alliteration, but that's really osteopathy that Andrew Taylor Still was talking about. I mean, I've read all his books. He's never mentioned back pain. I don't think. I don't think it gets a mention. He talks about finding out what's dysfunctional, looking at every nerve and every blood vessel, going to it and treating those. And when you do that, you go, wow, you can create a huge amount that way. And then the fourth C is, and this has moved on a bit from him because he thought about everything as having a single cause. We know things are a bit more complicated these days. So look at the vicious cycles. Basically, if someone's not getting better from someone, there's generally a vicious cycle holding that in place. And then from that, treating becomes a communication between your hands and yourself and the patient's body, and so diagnosis is an ongoing process, not a one-off event. So I think there's a whole lot of taglines. I did a list of them once that could be used for that in terms of marketing. But I think the main thing is I think from a strategic point of view, just talking more broadly from a business strategy
Yeah.
point of view, if you're a small player taking on a big player, the worst thing you can do strategically is try to make yourself look like the big player. I mean, why would you? What you want to do is stand out and make yourself look different to the big player and say, no, this is why, this is what we're doing. It's not the same. And it's pretty easy to demonstrate. I'm sure some physios would disagree, but it's pretty easy to demonstrate historically that where they came from and where their success came from was trying not to offend the medical profession, and so not doing things that doctors, not doing anything that doctors would see as their role, but fitting in around that. It was originally nurses that did it, and they worked very hard at not getting doctors offside. We could go into the history there. But I think the whole musculoskeletal thing comes from there. It comes from, well, this is what physios do, because it's kind of a safe space in terms of doctors. To follow that, I think it's a huge disservice to ourselves, the professional, strategically. It's a huge disservice to osteopaths, so many of whom feel they can't get enough patients, which is largely because they're not treating their patients for enough conditions. And above all, it's a massive disservice to patients who put up with terrible conditions and inappropriate medical interventions because they don't know, because no one, including their practitioners, know how easy it is to treat these things manually with your hands once you start thinking about thinking about them like an osteopath and looking at the research that's available around those things.
John, I want to push back a little bit here and maybe play a little bit of devil's advocate. You said earlier that the problem is that we're trying to be we're a small player taking on a big player, and we're trying to make ourselves look like the big player, and by doing that, we're not creating a point of difference. And I guess the problem that that Osteopathy Australia probably has is that they have to deal with APRA, and APRA is really trying to make us all look the same. With the way they regulate courses, with the way they have to accredit the courses at the end of the day. The council boards have to accredit the courses, and APRA themselves, if they find someone that's doing something a little bit different, they tend to kind of say, hey, take this down off your website. You can't have this, you can't have that. And so that seems to be, and everybody that I've talked to on the podcast and off the podcast seems to think the same thing, is that APRA is really pushing to make osteopaths, chiropractors, physios, exercise physiologists, everybody kind of look the same. And the association has to deal with APRA and has to kind of lobby them. And I guess they might feel like they're in a position that if they are arguing, I guess, for another position than APRA wants to take, then they may not have the success that they want to have in terms of lobbying. What do you think about that point? And is that something that's obviously a challenge for them? What do you think about that point? And how would you explain that?
I think it's certainly a valid point about APRA. For example, the different competency studies or the different competency lists they have for different professions. You could do a global change of pretty much from one profession to another, and it would read exactly the same way. But I think that's where you want an associate. Oh well, that's where I would like to have an association that was an association of osteopaths that had some confidence in our research base and was willing to push back against that. And you don't have to do that aggressively. You don't have to. That doesn't need to be based
antagonistic.
on conflict.
It doesn't have to be antagonistic.
No, but it needs to be done from a position of confidence in osteopathy. I think manual therapy generally around the world is having a crisis of confidence, and I think our profession in Australia is, and I think that it comes from a position of assertive confidence that we are that we have things that are different, and that intuitively ring true for patients, and that speak to an issue that even sensible doctors, if you put it to them, will go, yes, that is a problem. And the issue is the increasing fragmentation of medicine. So in this, we've got this explosion of knowledge, and so specialists can't possibly keep up. Like there's over 150,000 new publications come out on PubMed every month. So no specialist can keep up. What they're doing is becoming narrower and narrower within their own realms of specialty. And so for any patient with overlapping things that affect more than one symptom, they end up going to multiple specialists. Their GPs try to juggle this going to different specialists without really the mindset to deal with them. The patients are frustrated, and that's really broad. There's a broad swell of people who are frustrated with that whole process, who can see the ridiculous nature of it. And there's a huge opportunity for us to say, no,
we understand this. Yeah.
We look at the whole picture. We look at how things connect together. We look at how it all works as one. We're not just looking at one bit. We're looking at all of it, and we're looking at getting it all working better within itself, without putting up the things that government worries about, like the cost of pharmaceuticals. And there's a good story there. There's a good story that people aren't hearing. And there's a good story that people are ready to hear.
Part of that story, mate, I think comes back to the evidence that you've put together, because you mentioned earlier there's a bit of you have to go into these particular, I guess, if you want to use the word battles, but if you have to go into this battle, you need to have some confidence about you. And if you don't have the information at hand, if you don't have, I guess, weapons at your disposal, and in this case, for us, it's the evidence, then it's hard to have that confidence. It's hard to walk into a room with APRA and say, this is what we do, if you don't have the research. So this comes back to my point earlier, that the research that you've put together is so, it's very compelling. I keep describing it as a pot of gold, and I guess, why we're not using it, why we haven't put together something to say, hey, John, let's integrate this into what we do. So when we do walk into a room with APRA, we've got a position that we can take that is supported by the evidence, at least more evidence than what we have at the moment. And so that comes back to my point there. Now, I will kind of, I think we've had a great conversation today, John. I really want to thank you for your time. And what I do want to say in closing, I will give you the last word, but what I want to say in closing is that, this particular issue in terms of the evidence that you've put together really needs to be looked at. And I know that Osteopathy Australia has a research committee. It's not just one person that sits in a room and decides if these things happen or they don't happen. There is a research committee. I'm pretty sure Don Hunter's on that committee, who was in my cohort of students and a year below yours, and who's done some great work in research on shoulder pain and the role of shoulder pain in conjunction with thoracic movement. So Don's somebody who I'd like to speak to, and I'll put the call out to Don to come onto the podcast, and maybe he can, I can put these questions to Don or anybody on that research committee. I don't want to just single out Don, but anybody on that research committee that represents Osteopathy Australia. I'd love to have them on the podcast so we can kind of flesh this out and see why the work that John's done with this database cannot be at least looked at, and seeing if we can take the best things out of that and integrate it into what we have. And so that's the message I'm trying to get out of this podcast. John, is there anything you want to close with?
Yeah, probably. I think going along with the evidence, I think another aspect of it is we need to stop assuming that evidence-only medicine, as opposed to evidence-based medicine, is appropriate for anyone, and to recognise how little evidence there is supporting most of what happens in medical practices. How little evidence there is for most surgical procedures, for instance.
Yeah.
We think it's hard to do a clinical trial on manual therapy. It's much easier than it is for surgery. And a huge amount of that hasn't been done. Everybody is doing what true evidence-based medicine is, which is making clinical judgments using the best evidence available. That's not the same as saying you shouldn't do something if you don't have a clinical trial. But if it was, we'd be in a much stronger position than many health professions, including mainstream medicine.
John, if people want to get in contact with you, what's the best way to reach out to you, mate?
Look, if they Google John Smartt Osteopath, they'll get to my website, which has my contact details. Okay,
great. Stay on the line with me, John. But for everybody that's listening today, I want to thank John for his time and for your knowledge, and I also want to thank you for the work that you've done in compiling this database together. And so thank you, mate. Thank you for your time, and have a great day. And we'll talk soon. Hopefully we can do a round two.
Yeah, thank you. That was a lot of fun.
Great.